here from Gravity Art Lab with another acrylic painting video. This time I'm painting on an artist panel. This is an 8x8 cradled panel, and the reason I'm using it is because I plan to finish my painting with a pouring medium, and for that you really need a rigid support, so I decided to give this a shot. Now I'm working with my Acrylic student grade paints again, and I've just got the 3 primary colors out there and a little bit of white. I'll have a list of the exact colors and materials that I used in the information, so you can just check there and get all the information you need. So here I am applying my base coat. It's just a combination of the blue mixed with the white. You'll notice that I'm not spending a whole lot of time blending my 2 colors. In fact, I'm trying to keep some of the variations in there because I think it adds a lot of interest and it makes it really pretty when it's all done, when the colors are, they look more painterly when you keep them separate. Now, this is my base coat. I am going to go ahead and add a little bit more of this back on top. Right now my main priority is in getting all the areas of the canvas covered in paint. So I will be doing more blending than I want to get the effect that I want. So because of that, I will be coming back with a second layer on top of this just to add back in some of that variation. Now once I'm done covering the top surface, I'm going to go ahead and paint all my edges with that same mixture. I just don't like seeing that raw edge of that top board there, so that's why I'm going with the painted edge. You can always tape this if you prefer with some painter's tape and keep it clean, and when you're all done you can go ahead and remove that tape and have a nice natural wood finish there. That's a personal preference. So my first coat has had a chance to dry. It doesn't take very long. You could just let it dry, or you could speed the process up a little bit with a hair dryer. Either way works. And here I am going back over it with a little bit more white. I'm trying to brighten up the center area a bit where the fish are going to be, and again add some of that interest back in with some variations in the paint color. Unfortunately, my camera kicked off while I was laying in the design for my koi fish and lily pads, but you can see what the basic shapes look like here. If you are not comfortable going right on with the paint, you can go ahead and sketch your designs in with a piece of regular chalk, which makes it really easy to erase if you put a line where you don't want it, and you can paint right on top with your acrylic paint, so you don't even really have to erase it. And here you see me going back in and touching up a little bit. So I wasn't crazy about the shape, the overall shape of that one fish, so I'm going back in with some of that blended white and blue just to redefine the outline. Now it's a little tricky to do that sometimes, especially when you're not dealing with a paint that's right out of the container, because now you're trying to mix up paint that is sometimes hard to get perfect matches on. But because we have the variations in color in the areas around the fish, I can easily go back in and just sort of add some more streaks in there and touch up a little bit and make it so that area that I just touched up doesn't stand out. So I had been using my 3/4 inch flat brush for the background and laying in my designs. Now I'm switching over to my round brush. I'm going right into the red paint, and the round brush makes it a lot easier to get some of those smaller details, especially when you're doing round shapes as opposed to flat edge shapes. It just makes it easier to control where the paint's going. Now the shapes that I'm putting in here are just really random. I'm just trying to make it look a little bit more interesting with where I'm placing those marks. But you can really do anything you like here. Okay, moving on to my lily pads. I am loading my brush up with a little bit of the yellow, and I'm going to lay my first layer of color for those on with, again, still using my little round brush. Okay, so I'm mixing the color off camera there, but it's basically just a little bit of the blue and a little bit of the yellow blended together. Now when you're blending colors, you should always start with the lighter of the two colors. I know a lot of artists use a palette knife to scoop up their color onto the palette and blend it with that. I just use my brush. It's just a lot quicker and easier, and for paintings like this, I really don't get super technical about how I do it. So I scoop up a little bit of yellow and I push it over into a little puddle right next to where my main yellow is, just so I don't contaminate the whole puddle. And then I pick up a tiny bit of blue, because the blue is a darker shade and it will tend to overpower the mixture if I start off with too much of it. So I just add a little bit of the darker color at a time until I'm happy with the green. And here I am adding some of the yellow back in as sort of like a highlight, or a little bit of the texture back in. And here I am adding a little bit of white on there. So what we're trying to do is get almost a watercolor effect with this. It's a softer painting, and it's easier to do that too on a smooth panel like this. With the canvases, you have that texture that's coming through, and so you end up with something that's a little bit rougher. It's much easier to get a nice soft watercolor effect on these smooth canvases. So that's one other advantage to using this. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit more of that green and add some of the shadows back in there, just to give that lily pad a little bit more contouring effect, just to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. Okay, now I'm just going back in with some final touch-ups. I'm brightening up the white on the fish, and then I'm pretty much done with the painting part. My painting has had a chance to completely dry, and now I'm getting ready to do the last step, which is applying the pouring medium on top. I'm starting off by masking my edges, and I'm just using regular masking tape for this. You can use painter's tape as well. Make sure that you run it right up to the top edge of the surface and just wrap it all the way around. The reason I'm doing this is to prevent any of the pouring medium from getting onto the side. It really needs to lay on the top surface and completely harden. It's very difficult, or I don't even know if it's possible, to apply that medium to a vertical edge. And so I wouldn't be able to get a nice finish on all the sides. And what I would get would be a lot of the drips that come down, which I really don't want there. So that's why I'm applying the tape there. You probably noticed my Parmesan cheese lid that's laying on my surface, and that's not a leftover from my lunch. That happens to be there for a reason. I'm going to be using that to create little shims to help level my piece. And you'll see how I do that in a minute. So as I'm getting ready to apply my pouring medium, I just want to mention that this step is completely optional. You don't need to do this. You could just hang this piece on the wall and be good to go. This is the first time I'm actually using pouring medium, and I just really thought it lent itself to the subject of the painting. I wanted to get this glass-like, water-like, shiny effect, and that seemed to be the best way to do it. So I've cut my plastic lid into 4 pieces, and I'm going to be using 3 of them to create little shims that I can stick underneath my painting to help me level it. I also have a little level there that's going to help me, and you want to make sure that you're pushing the plastic lid under so that the outer surface is facing up, and that way you actually have sort of a lifting effect. When you push it in closer, it's actually going to lift that side of the board up a little higher. And I didn't need very much. I mean, this isn't raising it more than maybe a couple millimeters at the most. And that's because my table is nice and level. So you want to make sure that your table is level before you start doing this, or it will make it a lot more difficult to get this taken care of. So I've got my pouring medium divided into 2 little containers that I'm using for this piece. The first one, I am going to add a little bit of acrylic paint to it, and I'm a little off camera when I do this, but there, I'm doing it right there. I'm putting in a little bit of blue paint right on the little edge there, and my intent was to mix up a really, really pale shade of blue and to vary that with just a pure clear pouring medium on top to create these little ripple effects when I pour it. Now, again, this is the first time I'm using this, and the recommendation is that when you are blending acrylic paint with this medium, to use a liquid acrylic, which I didn't happen to have, so I used what I had, and the results were a little different than what I had anticipated. But it did come up with kind of a neat effect. So I'll show you that at the very end, and you can decide if this is something that you want to repeat or if you would rather just do the clear. So I'm just mixing this up. I'm going to speed this up a little bit, and I will show you the pouring process. Okay, here I am adding the pouring medium. I just put about a tablespoon of the medium that I had mixed the blue acrylic paint into on the surface, and now I'm getting out the just pure pouring medium without any paint in it, and I will be applying those alternately. If you look really close, you can see that the last bit that I put in there made sort of a white circle inside the really light blue circle. That's really the variation I got with the amount of paint that I added. So I didn't really add enough paint to make a big difference in there. And like I said, I did get kind of a cool effect at the end, and I'll show you what happened. It didn't do what I expected it to do, but it did create kind of a neat effect for me. So I'm noticing that there's some little dots of paint in there. At first I try to get it out, and then I realize that's not happening, so I decide to instead go ahead and blend it in and see what happens. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to incorporate that paint into the medium and I'm adding more. And the idea is really just to add enough until it drips all the way to the edges and everything fills in. So I'm just adding and waiting for it to spread. Now I've seen other videos where people add this and they add a ton of it. They just keep pouring it on there until it just spills over the edge and it keeps pouring. And I didn't want to do this here. I didn't want to make a huge mess. And I wanted to see if I could spread it with my palette knife and end up with a nice even coat, which I actually did manage to do, and I'll show you what it looks like at the end. So you don't need to go through tons of this stuff to get a nice finish on here, and it will automatically level itself out, and as long as you get all the surfaces covered. So the painting has had a chance to dry overnight, and it is completely dry. You can tell from looking at it that it's all clear and shiny. When I applied it, I don't know if you noticed, but there was a little bit of a milky haze to it, and as it dries, it just dries completely clear. Now there's a little bit of dripping on the edge that I'm showing you, and that's why we applied the masking tape. So my masking tape tore a little bit on the edges there where it was stuck to the pouring medium, but it all came off. If you use a thicker painter's tape, you'll probably get slightly better results, but like I said, it's not critical. It all came off and I didn't really have any big problems with that. Just to show you what I was talking about earlier, the effect of adding the regular acrylic paint to the pouring medium. Because it was not the liquid acrylic, it didn't blend completely, so I ended up with these little tiny dots of color that did not blend in perfectly, and so I ended up with these little speckles on my canvas. I kind of like them. It adds a little bit of interest. I didn't have to splatter it to get that. The only difficult thing is I didn't have a lot of control over where it ended up. I had to push it with my palette knife, but you know, play with it. A lot of times things happen that you don't expect, and you can always make it work. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it inspired you to get your paints out and get creative.